Thank you. Thanks for having me. My co-presenter, Kate Smith, who's Professor of History at the University of Tasmania, unfortunately couldn't make it today. I know you might have seen her on the initial draft of the program. We were going to do this together, but unfortunately she sends her apologies. She couldn't make it. This talk comes out of an Australian Research Council funded linkage project, which is called name right, Migration, Television and Cultural Diversity, Reflecting Modern Australia. And it's split between Melbourne, Tasmania and Wollongong universities, and our linkage partners are ACME, the Australian Centre for the Moving Image, and Museums Victoria. And we're looking at a wide variety of crossover between the broad history of migration to Australia in the latter half of the 20th century and the TV industry in Australia. For example, we're looking at migrants who worked in the TV industry, both on and off screen, migrants as viewers of TV programs, and representation of migrants and the issues surrounding migration, cultural diversity, racism, multiculturalism, how that's been reflected in Australian television production over the last 60 years. And part of this project, which I'll be talking about today, is TV that is produced by and for migrants. And there's a very small, lesser-known productions, these small-scale variety shows that were usually screened on weekend mornings or that sort of time slot, that had a very specific cultural focus. And a lot of this history took place prior to SBS, which we often think of as the TV and radio network that was created for migrants. But this is a history that is based in commercial TV and took place in the late 60s and into the 70s and into the 80s as well, before SBS was the media service for migrants and multicultural Australia. So I'll be looking at today variety shows that intertwine music, cooking, culture, documentary, that brought material from migrants' home countries, in this case it's Italy, and content or content of interest to these migrant communities. This was possible here and there to be done in languages other than English on Australian TV, depending on various language restrictions that were placed on television stations. But also, it's about we think about as community, and the community of Italians, not just in Melbourne, but Australia-wide, and then around the world. And the way that television variety shows were made and packaged and resold around the country and around the globe speaks to this diaspora community, which is the focus of this conference. And it is linked, the production of these variety shows is linked to the small business world, journalism and advertising worlds, and of course the music scene. And I just want to say I'm indebted to the work of John and Arlene, who will be talking about the music stuff in their talk later today. I want to start with a bit of a look at migrants, Italians, in employment in the TV industry, which is part of this focus. There's a great series of photos from the National Archives of migrants in employment, and a lot of these migrants were Italians, and a lot of them worked in the TV industry. For example, this guy who was lighting director at Channel 7 in Sydney in 1958. And as was the case with a lot of Europeans, they worked in the film and TV industries in Europe before they migrated to Australia. Of course, television didn't begin broadcasting in Australia until 1956, so they brought with them expertise, and often they were sponsored, their migration was sponsored by TV stations. Another example is this film editor at Channel 7 in Melbourne, arrived in Sydney, this is Melbourne, HS7, this is Sydney, ATN7. Arrived in 1952, had experience in film industry in Torino. Migrants who were less skilled in technical roles also worked as mechanics. They were sponsored by these large TV and electronics retailers like Goodwin's, which is in Newtown in Sydney. They also worked doing delivery. So the TV industry is quite large and diverse, and migrants from Europe in this mass post-war wave of migration worked across the industry in technical and non-technical roles. Here's a girl who arrived in 1962 and with her mother, and they worked in a factory making TV and radio components. she was notable for winning a beauty contest or something, Queen of Industry, I think it was, in Sydney in 1962, just a couple of months after she arrived. Part of this is also a retail and business history. Many of you will be familiar with Kosovo TV Repairs in North Fitzroy, which is, I think, a Serbian-run business. But this extends to the Italian migrant community as well. And that's where I will get to the very famous furniture retailer Franco Cozzo, who was one of these Italian migrants who didn't have a background in film or television, but he got involved in the TV industry in a fairly peculiar way. He came from Sicily to Australia in December 1955 and worked doing deliveries for white goods and electronics for one of these large retail houses. The clientele was frequently Italians, Greeks and other new migrant families. And pretty soon, Franco Cozzo started his own business in Northcote, selling furniture, white goods and electronics. He soon got rid of the white goods and electronics. He told me that people kept coming back to him and saying, something's broken, can you repair it? He wasn't interested in repairs, he just wanted to work in sales. And his business boomed, and of course he's very famous here in Melbourne as a furniture retailer, and eventually he, by the late 60s, had 4 shops and had a fairly high turnover, especially catering to migrant families. So by the late 60s, he conceived of a television program called Carosello, which was devised as an advertising opportunity. Basically, he would sponsor half an hour of music, Italian music, on commercial TV, and it was broadcast out of the Channel 0, which is now called Channel 10 studios in Nunawading in Melbourne. And so his name was attached to the program. He would spruik his furniture stores throughout the program, and basically it was produced as a music variety television show by the trio Franco, which was his initial musical act, who was the backing band. They did all the production, they got the acts in, and they produced the show. So they were an Italian musical act who had played around Melbourne, and they're integral to the success of the program. This is part of a larger industry of migrant music, both live music and recorded music, and supported by the record stores and social clubs and other music scenes in Melbourne. And of course we can find equivalents in Sydney as well, and other communities where Italians settled in large numbers. Here's the trio Franco and a couple of others filming, and this is in the HTV and radio guide. The trio Franco soon left, and because there was a lot of work and not much pay, and were replaced by another act, Sergio Giovanni, and his band, The Flippers. Just to give you an idea of what Carosello was like, I found a clip online. I think it's the only surviving episode of the show, but it will give you some idea of what the show was like. Italian pop songs performed in Italian, but with an English compere, and occasionally some Italian translation.
Last number of shows coming up in just a moment, featuring Sergio G and the Flippers. But just before that, I'd like to take this opportunity of wishing you all a very good night on behalf of the artists and Franco Cozzo, who brought you Carosello. So until then, this is Colin McEwen. Until this time next week, 5 o'clock, Colin McEwen wishing you all a very good night. Or in Italian, da ascoltare Carosello domenica prossima alle ore 5. Ogni domenica. Buonasera a tutti.
Anyway, I'll pause it there. Don't worry, I've got more music later in this talk. This is the style. It's pretty innocuous. It's very low key, low budget, and look, it was done just purely as an advertising advertising for Franco Cozzo's furniture stores, but it's also a part of this cultural scene of community music in the Italian community in Melbourne. Of course, it was only broadcast out of the studios at Nunawading at what we can now call Channel 10. So it wasn't screened elsewhere in Australia. This is a local affair. All the performers were Victorians. So it wasn't syndicated and didn't have the reach that Variety Italian style did, which I'll talk about later in this talk. There was a copycat show of some description, I guess we could call it a copycat show, called Sortino's Rendezvous. Now, I've been unable to find any footage of this. It was sponsored by another furniture retailer, Sortino's Home Furniture, in Melbourne. And it was again produced by musicians, the Scartozzi brothers, Cesare and Alessandro, who called themselves the Duo Moreno, who came to Australia in the late 50s, sponsored by Reg Ansett as entertainers for his resort on Hayman Island in North Queensland. The other producer was Sergio Focci, who arrived in 1953, and who was also involved in the music scene in Melbourne, both live and recording records, producing records, singing in Italian and also in Spanish. He's Sergio's Four, and here's a Rendezvous with Sergio. That was taken on Hayman Island at the resort where the Scartozzi brothers were engaged as performers. Now, Sergio had been involved in TV before Sortino's Rendezvous, the copycat variety music show in Melbourne, as the compere and band leader of an ABC show called Latin Holiday in 1961. Now, I've only got the opening titles, but this is similar sort of style of music of various cultures, which was quite common on the ABC in the late 50s and early 60s, to have performers, often from the musical or the revue worlds, doing cabaret-style performances on the ABC. This is the opening titles to Latin Holiday, which Sergio Focci was the compere of. That's all there is. That's all I've been able to find. Cafe Continental was another similar show like this, cabaret-style revue performances in various languages, also some comedy and slapstick sort of stuff. On the ABC, screened from 1959 to 1961. Its compere was an Austrian, Hans Weber, who called himself Hal Wayne for Australian audiences, but it often featured Italian performances. He's Juanita Caletti on the right here. And some other Italian performers did juggling on the show, Leo and Giuliano Bassi. Interestingly, part of their act was juggling TVs with their feet. Now this is them performing a travelling vaudeville show in Broken Hill, but they also performed the same act on Cafe Continental on the ABC in the late 50s. Anyway, I'm getting away from my topic about Italian variety shows, but just to illustrate the breadth of the intertwined scenes of music, vaudeville, revue, and I guess a maintenance of culture in the music worlds that came to TV fairly early in Australia. Obviously, the ABC shows aren't produced by the Italian community for the Italian community. They have a broader reach, but they certainly they were part of this world of musical variety television shows that Carosello and Sortino's Rendezvous capitalised on in the late 60s in Melbourne. Now this brings me to Antonio Luciano, who was born in Brisbane to an Italian father and Australian mother. His father and his uncle, this is him with the brown hair, of course. Now his father and uncle had started an Italian language newspaper, the Il Corriere d'Australia, in 1953, and I think it ran until about 1960. And when he was young, Antonio, or Tony as he was called, mostly worked with his father and uncle on the newspaper and also in the business that they ran, which was very broad, offering services to new migrants business, helping with naturalisation, with shipping, that sort of stuff. quite frequently as interpreters and just providing cultural services. That was the business that his father ran alongside the newspaper. Now, Tony described, when I interviewed him about this project last year, he described himself as an Australian. He felt himself to be very Australian. Grew up speaking English, not Italian, and soon got away from the family business and went into advertising and public relations with J. Walter Thompson. And it was here that he, working in the advertising and PR world, developed a relationship with Channel 10 in Sydney. And soon got the idea that a television show, a variety style show, not just music, but a broader variety show, a broader variety show that featured not just music, but documentary segments, news and current affairs, sport, cooking, and so on, could be a really good business opportunity. He told me when I interviewed him, I thought there's a career here in terms of putting together a national service that is good for the consumption of the community. I'm going to do it in the English language, even though the component is going to be Italian, so that it will be of interest to all Australians, not just Italians. Here is a brief segment from the show of what I've been able to find. Again, there's limited footage out there, but this is just to give you a taste of what the musical segments were like on Variety Italian Style. Anyway, could go on, there's a whole 4 minutes of that, but I'll stop it there. Look, there's a fairly low budget productions like Carosello, but Variety Italian Style differed in that it was a package show. Tony Luciano produced it in Sydney using filmed footage that he filmed often at the Channel 3 studios in Newcastle because it was cheap to hire rather than hiring a studio in Sydney. And he edited it all together with footage he obtained from overseas. He had a good relationship with the Prime Minister's Department of the Italian government, which would send him footage that he would use. He also bought stuff from TV stations in Italy, the Italian-speaking parts of Switzerland and Yugoslavia, and would basically edit them all together into an hour-long package with an English language voiceover. And that was the package that he sold, and he screened that on TV on Channel 10 in Sydney, but he also sold the show around Australia and increasingly overseas. Variety Italian Style was seen in the United States, in Canada, and I think in parts of Europe as well. The attractiveness of the package was, if anyone got the package, all they would have to do is a new voiceover and that's it. Sometimes not even that. So, with a good relationship with the advertisers who would advertise during the show, it was able to be quite profitable. And that's how Variety Italian Style ran for a good 14 years, rather than the furniture retailer sponsored musical variety shows, which were just basically rented airtime that these retailers bought from the television station. This Variety Italian Style was a very profitable deal, and its appeal was much broader because it wasn't just music. It was cooking segments, as I mentioned, documentary. I think some of the stuff seen on Variety Italian Style was the first time Italians were able to get Italian soccer on TV in Australia. Now, it was quite popular. This is a survey done in 1978, not just amongst Italians, but amongst Serbo-Croatians, Spaniards, and Arabs in Sydney and Melbourne. I mean, that's the 93% of Italians who watched Variety Italian Style last Sunday in Melbourne is quite a stunning figure as far as audiences for TV shows go. Look, I don't know any more about this survey. I'd love to get my hands on it, but I think it's at least a small indicator of the popularity of this. 1 minute?
1 minute.
Okay, great. Look, the cooking segments, which were hosted by Tony's wife, Anne, gained a life of their own in a new show, Anne's International Kitchen, which was screened on SBS for another 8 years, from the mid-80s to the mid-90s. She was a Czech migrant, spoke English, not Italian, but look, this is part of the maintenance of variety on television that is not just of interest to Italians, but has a broader reach. So look, just to conclude this, I just want to emphasise, and I know other scholars have done this, about the community aspect of variety television in Australia. It's quite a valuable service, and also a valuable business opportunity in advertising to and performing a service for migrant communities, especially when first-generation Italians who migrated to Australia may not have been able to get that much out of English language television. Shows like Variety Italian Style, Carousel, Sortene's Rendezvous, and the review-style musical shows on the ABC in the late 50s and early 60s provided some sort of cultural entertainment that was of broader appeal than Anglo-produced television. So, look, I'll leave it there, but also want to finish with a request. If anyone remembers watching these shows,
yes.
Please come and talk to me. We really want to talk to you for our project. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.